Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in. The resource person will be joining within a few minutes. So Gurmeet ma'am is with us. Good afternoon, everyone present here. I am Ishika, second year student of GNDEC School of Architecture, Ludhiana. Today, we all have gathered here to mark World Heritage Day, celebrated on 18th of April every year, to maintain the legacy, save the rich heritage, and also to preserve human heritage. Heritage is a keystone of our culture. It provides clues to our past and how our society has evolved. So today, we have with us the pioneer who has been working for the conservation of our prestigious heritage, architect Gurmeet S.Rai. I would now like to invite Professor Dr. H.S. Rai, Head Department of Civil Engineering, Guru Nanak Dev Engineering College, to welcome our esteemed guest. Please, sir.
Thank you, Ishika. I welcome our speaker of the today and expert, architect Gurmeet S.Rai, to this special
Sir, your voice
lecture.
is not audible.
Is it low volume or it is totally muted?
It is fine, sir. It is audible.
It is audible. Okay,
Yes.
fine. So on behalf of Guru Nanak Dev GNDEC School of Architecture and Guru Nanak Dev Engineering College, Ludhiana, I welcome our expert speaker. She will be giving lecture on World Heritage Day, that why we should take care of our heritage and what are the issues involved in that. Now, this is something very important which our students would like to listen. Before that, I would like to introduce our speaker, architect Gurmeet S.Rai, is Delhi-based architect who is doing great work in conservation of cultural resources. She started her journey in this direction about 38 years ago when she started her Bachelor of Architecture from Chandigarh College of Architecture. She graduated and became an architect in year 1988. She acquired specialization in architecture conservation from School of Planning and Architecture, which normally we call SPA, New Delhi. During her M.Arch, which she completed in year 1991. Architect Rai remained Assistant Director of Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage for duration of about 3.5 years during 1992-95. Architect Gurmeet Rai set up Cultural Resource Conservation Initiative, which is abbreviated as CRCI, as conservation consultancy firm to enhance and strengthen creative approach to otherwise which is considered as a routine practice. As director of her startup, CRCI, for more than the last 25 years, she is handling project management, scoping work, monitoring, client interaction, community consultation. She has undertaken a wide range of projects within the domain of cultural heritage, conservation, and management practice. Her work includes architectural documentation, historic building, conservation planning, projects related to cultural heritage tourism and management, capacity building and training, which is very important if we want a new generation come, and it's a part of the knowledge sharing and to cope up with the manpower shortage. Her clients include Nepal, Myanmar, in India, the Archaeological Survey of India, Ministry of Tourism, and many state governments like Punjab, Rajasthan, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir, and others. Many private foundations, institutions, Asian Development Bank, UNESCO, and others. Some of the significant projects include preparation of site management plans for the World Heritage Sites of Red Fort and Ellora Caves, conservation and management plan for the Govindgarh Fort in Amritsar, the GT Road in Punjab, conservation plans for historic building in Golden Temple in Amritsar. She prepared the visitor management and site management plan for World Heritage Site at Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Buddha in Nepal, and Cultural Heritage Policy for Punjab, a UNESCO project. Her vast experience in conservation and heritage management has been recognized by the World Monument Fund in New York, who appointed her as project management consultant for scoping and coordinating conservation of 43 protected monuments in Madhya Pradesh. She was awarded Award of Distinction for 2 projects by UNESCO under Asia Pacific Architectural Heritage Awards in the year 2002 and 2004 for demonstrating community inclusive conservation program. She is currently engaged in several conservation projects across the country. The work of her company have received numerous awards and recognitions, including UNESCO and Government of Punjab. Recognizing significant contribution in the field of heritage conservation, architect Gurmeet Rai has been on the jury of Asia Pacific Architectural Heritage Award for UNESCO for several years. And here I would like to mention that she is the only Indian who got this distinction to be a part of jury. She is Vice President and officiating President of Council on Monuments and Sites. That's India. ICOMOS. She is an expert voting member on the International Scientific Committee on Cultural Tourism. The International Day for Monuments and Sites, which we also call World Heritage Day, was proposed by International Council on Monument and Sites, to which architect Gurmeet is associated vice president of its Indian chapter as vice president and officiating president on April 18, 1982, and approved by General Assembly of UNESCO in 1993. And I would like to mention here, this is the same year when architect Rai started her study for B.Arch from Chandigarh College of Architecture. The aim of this day is to promote awareness about diversity of cultural heritage of humanity, their vulnerability and efforts required for their protection and conservation. And I feel we are lucky to get such an expert on this occasion, and we will be enlightened by the vast experience and rich knowledge of the speaker. I welcome architect Gurmeet Rai and also all the participants, and I am sure this deliberation will be very fruitful for everyone who is attending this webinar. Thank you very much. Over to host.
Thank you so much, sir, for welcoming our guest. I request the audience before starting to keep their microphones on mute mode, and if they have any queries during the session, they can post it in the chat box. Now, I would request our expert to commence the session. Please, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm adequately audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm delighted to be here at this forum to share with the students of architecture of Guru Nanak Engineering College about heritage and marking the occasion of the International World Heritage Day. A little clarification, while I am closely associated with ICOMOS, which is International Council on Monuments and Sites, I'm not currently the vice president. My tenure got over in the year 2020. So otherwise, thank you so much, Professor Rai, for making such a overwhelming introduction. I would like to congratulate Professor Sehgal for, I had a brief conversation, a few conversations with him over the last few days, and I'm quite impressed and moved by the enthusiasm that he expressed towards heritage and his commitment of wanting the students to get exposure to heritage matters. For me personally, it is very satisfying and encouraging to hear that interest, because when I began my practice in heritage conservation and I began my work, like Professor Rai said, I worked with INTAC for a few years, and then I decided that I will, INTAC being a national body, and I was doing that, I was working with them in Delhi. I decided that I will engage with my own home state, which is the state of Punjab, to understand heritage and to understand the tools that are necessary for conservation and management of heritage in the country, because our country is so rich and diverse that I did believe that it's very important that we should first understand the sensitivity, while, and there's nothing more sensitive, we are more sensitive to our own homes, and to develop your tools there before one goes and engages on a national platform or an international platform. And this I heard from my professor, who I consider as my guru and mentor in conservation, and that's Sir Bernard Fielden. He was knighted for his work in the York Minster Cathedral in the UK, and he really loved India. And he was responsible in the setting up of INTAC in India and setting up of the first program on conservation in India in the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. So he advised, I heard him speak about this, that he saw himself as a provincial architect. And what he meant was that you think global but act local. So you develop your tools in areas where you understand the most, and once you develop the sensitivity and the tools, then you're in a position to apply it on a larger canvas, at a global level or at a national level. So I worked in Punjab for several years, and I continue to engage with Punjab, and then subsequently I've been working across the country and in different parts of the world. And what I propose to share with you on this very important day is my first project in restoring a monument in Punjab. And it was actually the first building, the first historic building that I got to restore in the year 1999 and year 2000. Before that, we were largely doing mapping and documentation and, doing more research-based work. So I will share the presentation, and I have to. I don't think you, can you see my presentation? Can you see the opening screen?
No, ma'am.
Okay, wait a minute. I'm going to...
Only Google Meet screen is visible.
Okay, now let me try this, because I have my PowerPoint presentation on. And if I press present now, a window, but I can't seem to get the option of my PowerPoint presentation.
I'm going to try to share whole desktop.
See if no, this is also not working. See, because my presentation is open on my laptop, and if I do present now,
Ma'am, try sharing entire screen.
if I do entire screen, I can only see the Google Meet. So I can only see the Google Meet screen. I can't see my PPT.
Good evening, ma'am. Vivek this
Yeah.
side. Ma'am, you please
Yes.
turn off your presentation first and then open it. Then you will be able to share that.
First, I close the
Close.
PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, I'll close it. Okay, so now I've closed it. And now I open again.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now I've opened it. And then I'm going to present now again. It's just showing me the Chrome wants to share the content of your screen with, if I press just that, if I say share. No, it's...
Yes, ma'am, it's visible now.
You can see my presentation?
No, ma'am, you have to switch to PowerPoint now. Don't stop presenting.
So how do I?
Just open PowerPoint from the taskbar.
Can you see it now?
No, ma'am.
I don't know why, because normally this happens, gives the options very peacefully.
Ma'am, Sajit is here. First, you share entire screen and then open PowerPoint.
See, if I say present now and say your entire screen, I've got.
After that, you open PowerPoint. You can't see us, but only presentation is there.
See if I no, but right now it says share your entire screen. If I say share, it doesn't give me an option of the PowerPoint.
Ma'am, Aditya here. It's now visible.
Sorry.
Your screen is being shared now, ma'am.
Just switch to the PowerPoint now from Google Meet.
Just click on PowerPoint. If I
Yes, it's visible now.
you can see my screen.
Yes,
It's fine now. Madam, make it full screen.
Can you see
It's
it now?
fine.
yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So the project that I'm going to share with you is conservation of a temple in a village called Kishankot in Gurdaspur district in Punjab. And this is a project that we undertook in the year 99-2000. And because UNESCO had declared the year 2000 as the International Year for Culture of Peace. Now, this to my mind is very relevant today as it was when we worked on it. And it was very important for us when I came across this building. It was in the course of undertaking mapping of historic buildings. I had earlier mapped historic buildings and sites along the Grand Trunk Road, and then I was mapping historic buildings in different districts. And I would like to share this with the students that, look, the first thing about management of any resource is that you should first know what is this resource. So what we do in heritage practice is prepare a list, and that list is called preparing inventories of your heritage sites. So whatever it may be, whether, if you're a librarian, you'll want to make an inventory of your books. If you're, in charge of any particular thing, the first thing you need to know is what do you have? And then you need to know is what are the attributes of the things that you have. So here in Punjab, when I began my practice as a young student of conservation, you people are much younger than what I was when I started this work. I would say I started my work in heritage in 92. Yeah, I finished my master's in 91. 92 is when I started doing my heritage work. So for a good number of 5 to 7 years, I wanted to familiarize myself with what does Punjab have. And mind you, at that point, heritage conservation was not something which was being done in Punjab. There were about 30 odd monuments protected by the State Department of Archaeology and a smaller number of sites protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. And very little conversation was happening about heritage conservation. So for me, it was like, what does Punjab have? Even if I had grown up going for my summer vacations, winter vacations to Punjab, I wasn't too familiar with that. What is the heritage of Punjab? So when I began my work, I started preparing inventories of heritage sites. And what I found was that in Punjab, the Sufi Bhakti tradition of the land, we read about the 15th century, 16th century of the Sufi and Bhakti saints. We know about the Sikh gurus. We know about Kabir ji. We know about a lot of these saints. And it almost, when history is taught, it is taught as if the period gets over and something new starts. Now, that's not how life is. Life is in a continuum. Heritage continues to be created. People have memories. People have association. And heritage is not something of the past. It is something which is very much in the making in this very moment. What you create today will become heritage tomorrow. So I realized that when you go into the villages of Punjab, the Sufi Bhakti tradition is very much alive, and people live the traditions in terms of sharing with each other, in terms of engaging with each other's religion, and celebrating the saints and peers of each other's faith, and the way they engage with the festivals with each other's faith. And then I came across this particular building, and this is what I saw. In a small village in Gurdaspur, I came across this little temple that I saw at a distance, and I just decided I'll go and have a look. What is there in this temple? And I was amazed that there were about 2,000 square feet of the most beautiful wall paintings, which demonstrate the Sufi and the Bhakti tradition of this area. This building was built in the first part of the 19th century, and it was during the times of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's mother-in-law, Sada Kaur. So this village belongs to Chhajumal, who was a general in the army of Sada Kaur, and he had a very responsible position to look after Maharaja Ranjit Singh when he was a little boy, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh was a little boy, and this temple belongs to that particular family. But when I went into the village, what meets the eye to an architect is this wonderful courtyard building. It's got these lovely wall paintings. And then what I also found was that there's a relationship, and the relationship existed between the people and the site. And it is very important for you students to realize that everything is not beautiful and happy. So when you visit a heritage site, when you write a report, or when you do some research, whenever there are moments of discomfort, we kind of pretend they don't exist. We want to give a nice story. History must tell you something nice and fun and something exciting. But that's not what history is all about. History is a very, very complex narrative. And it is very important that we really pick up a balanced view, and we pick up all the layers of the story, whether it is a sad part, or it is something contested, or it is something to be celebrated. And even in things which feels that is not a happy story, there is always some nuance which gives you some positive meaning as well. So it's literally like, when we watch a film, or when we read a book, when you look at a monument or a building, a heritage site, it's like reading a book. And you get to know about the people in the past, you get to know the people of today, you get to know about the architecture of the past, you get to understand how people engage with that architecture today, and how do they repair that building, what does it mean to a people, what are the memories. There could be milestone events, or there could be something very small like festivals on day-to-day basis, All of that becomes important when we try to understand a building of heritage. So what I found in the temple was that there were people still engaging with the temple on day-to-day basis. The temple belongs to the Thakur family, but they unfortunately left the village during the time of the militancy in Gurdaspur, in Punjab. And they had left, and the temple was lying abandoned. So it's the village people who started looking after the building. The building was not protected by any instrument of the government. It wasn't a protected monument. What I also understood was that there are other issues related to the site. There are association with violence and unrest, of between the 1970s to 1990s. The temple was being used as a little police station, and there were policemen who had occupied all these rooms, which they were using as accommodation. And people had even memories of that. They even had memories of how food was being cooked inside the temple, and which they found very, very uncomfortable. They also had memories of that when the Thakurs were there, many of them were not allowed in the temple. Now, these are the things which are part of our socio-cultural narrative. So we as conservation architects, when we engage with these sites, we cannot pretend that these problems do not exist. We have to understand that heritage buildings have stayed there for centuries, and people have a lot of associations with these. And it is very important for us to record that what associations do these people have with the temple. What was also very interesting was that the temple continued to exist because after the Thakurs had left, we had gone there in the year 96, 97. People continued to look after the site. Now, this is where the strength of our communities is, that in spite of having stories which were of, discomfort and social abuse, they still felt strongly that the temple belonged to them and the temple is their heritage and they must look after it. So we went in as a team, a multidisciplinary team. We recognized that, look, there are conservation architects who are needed for the restoration of the building. We realized that there were art conservators who were needed because of the kind of artworks that existed in the temple. And we also realized that because of the complex scenario, we needed community workers as well. So we also had social people with masters in social work with us. So this is something which I would like all your students to recognize, that heritage is not the work of a single skill or a single type of, organization. It may require partnerships and collaborations between people and specialists. This is how we found the temple. While we did find people were looking after, doing their little ceremony, doing a bit of seva, we also saw that the temple environment was in a bad condition. Now, many of us who are from the cities will look at something like this and say, people do not care about their heritage. Then you kind of look at yourself and you say, look, is that true? Is it because people don't care? Or is it because the social conditions, is the health of a monument also a symptom of the health of a community? Is there a problem in the village that the reason why the temple is, the condition is like that? Because this is a public asset. And then we realized that there were a lot of social issues that the village is facing. And in spite of engaging with the site to an extent, communities do not have the resources to look after public assets. And government was not involved as well. And there are pros and cons in both the situations. When we went in to restore, we also, because we got, in my first visit itself, there were so many stories that people wanted to tell us. Now, this becomes a very important part about heritage conservation practice. And this is something UNESCO talks about. This is something which ICOMOS talks about, that conservation of cultural heritage needs to be anchored in the community to whom this heritage belongs. The heritage may be in a poor condition, but it has survived because of these people and not because of somebody like me, who comes from outside and says, okay, now everybody get aside, we are here and we'll fix your building for you. And that is the worst that a practitioner can do, is not give dignity to the people to whom this heritage actually belongs, and to look at little nuances which demonstrate that people care for their heritage. And whatever we as professionals want to do, we need to first listen to what the community wants to say about their heritage. Because all said and done, this particular temple, when you see that green paint on the wall, is not because they did not want to look after the temple. In fact, that green paint is there because they don't know any other way of looking after the temple. So somebody has spent their personal money to make that temple look nice and do that seva. And in fact, that is what shows you. Those are the little indicators of that, how the community feels about the heritage. So we began the conservation work. We were very mindful because we were doing this work under the theme of culture of peace. And culture of peace can only be brought in if we give dignity to each other, if we recognize everybody and we include everybody in the processes. And this is something which UNESCO talks about. This is what Sustainable Development Goals are all about, that inclusive practices is what is critical for sustainability, and peace is a fundamental need for us for a sustainable society. And therefore, cultural heritage can be a tool, and cultural heritage conservation can be an opportunity to build this dialogue, to demonstrate inclusive practices, and for building towards a culture of peace. So this is what we did. We decided that working on the monument also requires working on the environment of the monument. And we recognized that the community as the caretakers, and they need to be empowered with the right skills so that after we leave, they have a memory of what was done for the restoration of the building, and they were very much part of that process. Not that everybody will learn everything, but people build memories, and that is critical as part of the conservation process. And this is slowly and steadily we started working on the environment of the monument. We also brought in technologies, brought in new materials that were needed for the conservation. So here what you see is that we set up the workyard to prepare the lime mortars right outside the temple, because we wanted people to see that the work is going on, for people to know something is happening about their site. And this is a complete way of, a transparent way of functioning. Anybody who would come and want to know, we were very, very mindful that we must explain to whoever is interested in knowing that what is this lime, how do we make the mortar, why are we not using cement, and you can see you see from the oldest, there's Ganga Singh here to the left, who was the oldest worker, and the young men as well as little children, all of them very keen to lend a helping hand. Now typically what would a contractor do? Ki bhag jao, yahan se abhi yahan kaam ho raha hai, ab yahan mat aao. You know? Now that is not the way to do conservation. That's not how we thought it was. If a young child, a young mind is interested in knowing, he or she has as much right to that knowledge as an architect or a contractor or a mason or whoever. And we made this knowledge very, very accessible. What you see here is architects engaging with masons. So here is Sukha here on the ladder, who's a mason, who was participating in the documentation that was happening of the temple. What you see in the center is young boys in the village being trained by Shri Kumar, who's an art conservator, and Prashant, to learn how to remove the lime wash from the walls, and wall paintings were emerging, and they were very good, these young people. The ones who were not interested in such a tedious work were doing more simpler work, which you see, which is removal of all that later interventions of cement, concrete on the flooring. And here what you see on the right side is the masons, Prema, working on the conservation of the flooring. Now, some of the conservation challenges, while understanding the community and the social context, we needed to very carefully understand the conservation challenges as well. We saw that, you know, the masonry that you see under these arches is what the police had put in while they were making use of these buildings. They put cement, concrete had been put on the floor, not necessarily by the police, maybe afterwards, maybe before, which was very bad for the building, because the moment you put cement on the floor, you're actually trapping the moisture in the floors. And then this moisture starts rising in the walls, and that's how you start losing your historic plaster work. But here we saw in one of the rooms on the right side that you see the photograph, that, you know, the roof had just timber rafters and had brick tiles and had some plastic sheets and this earth fill. Now, what was happening was during the rains, the water was going through this roof And what you see on the floor is a pattern which shows that how the rainwater was falling through the roof. You know, these patterns are between the bricks that the water was coming. But because there was no cement concrete here, that there was water was falling down and used to dry out from here. But if they had put cement concrete here, the floors would have dried with rising damp in the walls. Now, because they had not put an impervious layer on the floor, there was very little rising damp in the walls, because of which the paintings survived. So our first work was that we cleared the areas outside, we created this plinth protection, moved the village water drain away from the building. Then we worked on the roofs, opened up the roofs and redid the roofs with timbers and brick tiles and lime concreting. And this is what they're doing, preparing the terracing. We removed all the cement mortars and all the pulverized bricks. And what we found was that inside the masonry, it was brick with mud mortar. Only the outermost layer had lime. So we kind of followed the similar techniques. We recycled the old bricks and relaid them in lime mortar. And this is how we restored like for like using the traditional systems. These are the glimpses of the wall paintings inside. When I talk about the Sufi and the Bhakti tradition, it's a Krishna temple, and you have these dwarpals here, you have wall paintings with the story from Mahabharata, and then you have another room which has the wall paintings of the Sikh gurus, and then you have another chamber which has a more stories, a lot of landscapes from, there was Jagannath, the deities from the Jagannath temple, there was Garud, there's Lord Shiva and Parvati. The whole lot of here, what you see is the Nandi here, and there's a most beautiful painting here of Shiva and Parvati with the Nandi. So you see a most fabulous, complex collection of wall paintings, all done during the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and we're talking about this in the Sikh School of Painting, which is an amalgamation of Kangra and adapted to the plains of Punjab. Very different from the Patiala School of Painting, which is more from Rajasthan, whereas the Sikh School of Painting has a lot to do with the Kangra School of Painting. The paintings were in some of them were in worse condition than others, but like I said, the rising damp was very minimal, so that was very, very useful. But because there were salts, and there are various sources for salts, it could be because of their bird droppings on the roof, and these phosphates mix with water, and when it rains, it goes into the masonry. And then with the wetting and the drying cycle, you start seeing salts, which, when they dry up, they expand, and you see these kind of blisters that form. And so there were problems like that. Because of the immense amount of moisture, there was algae. There are other salt crystallization that has happened on the surface, which is a lesser of a problem as compared to salt crystallization that happens behind the painting surfaces. So the art conservators worked very carefully. One, of course, was to remove the later editions, which is all this green paint. Then here are the art conservators doing consolidation of some of the wall paintings. Some places needed cleaning, so here they've left half as an uncleaned area and half as a cleaned area, and the possibility of retrieving the historic surfaces. So now these were the questions, that how to equip the community for times after the site has been conserved physically, and how to facilitate collective participation in the conservation process. So while you have understood some of the technical aspects related to conservation, we also thought, like I mentioned to you earlier, that there were certain social issues that the community was facing, and it was the village had about 100 households, and so our social workers actually did very in-depth household survey, to understand that what is the literacy ratio and what is the kind of livelihoods that people are engaged in, and the religious communities and so on. Because in the course of the conservation work, we realized that there were a lot of discomfort that was also emerging. You know, there were people who were slightly richer, who felt more empowered and felt that, you know, they are the ones who had the right to be engaged with the sites. There were others who were from a certainly weaker, economically weaker background, and they had assumed that they do not have access to the temple, and we will also not reach out to them. So we were very mindful that when we do our conservation work, we are going to make ourselves accessible to everybody. And for us, none of the members of the community are going to be more privileged than the others. So we put in place certain platforms for dialogue with the women, certain platforms for dialogue with the young boys, because we saw that there were a lot of problems. There was a lot of drug abuse, there was a lot of alcoholism, there was, you know, a whole lot of other challenges in the community. And we thought this was a very important opportunity. While they were trying to reach out to us, people started reaching out to our sociologists and our social workers who lived there in the village. There were 6 of them who were living in the village. There were 2 conservation architects, 2 art conservators, and 2 social workers. These professionals made themselves accessible to the community to understand their problems and find, and while we were there for 1 year, look at opportunities that could be brought to the village for a certain kind of a upliftment. And we realized that while the conservation was happening, because we were working with a cultural site, that these people actually believed in us. They actually wanted us to address some of their needs, you know, like these young, related to education and, you know, social issues. I mean, you can imagine that suppose we were the contractors building a road in the village, would the village people come to us with their problems? And maybe not. Because we had touched a cultural site and something which was close to their heart, they actually felt that they could come to us with their problems as well. We also looked at this as an opportunity that, look, if they're asking us for some, like the women were asking for some medical assistance, there were older people who had issues related to eyesight. It took very little from us to actually go to the office of the Deputy Commissioner in Gurdaspur and ask them to organize a medical camp. Because these are the kind of development works that district administration does do. So when people came to us with certain issues, especially the ones, the more vulnerable, the senior citizens, the children, the women, we took it upon ourselves that while we are doing this restoration of the building, if people associate this with a certain kind of comfort that they need in their lives, we made ourselves, our project, kind of, we kind of thought of it as a platform for further improvement and addressing some of their needs. And we realized that there was very little help that we needed to do. You know, if there was a camp that needed to be done, we went to the Deputy Commissioner's office. That wasn't a problem for them to agree. But then when we brought it to the village and told the young people that, look, the camp can happen, but you people will have to make arrangements for where this camp has to happen, we found that how the youth and the women, they all kind of got into absolute action. They are the ones who went into problem solving, that where will this camp be held, you know, on which day it can be held, we needed volunteers for it to be done. And we realized that it was so easy for the community to be, I mean, they were such basically, I would say people are dying to help themselves. All they need is a certain platform to be the trigger. And then they empower themselves. It's only when people like us, when we go from outside and we treat human beings as if they are lesser people, that we disempower them. And we bring in these projects as if, you know, we are there to make a difference to their lives and they are not capable of making decisions. And that is where the paradigm shift has to happen, where we even work with cultural heritage. That cultural heritage actually creates a platform for dialogue, and it creates a beautiful platform for self-empowerment of the community and for the community to come out to find solutions for themselves. we also realized that while the temple conservation was a very small project, people spoke about to us about why they protected the temple. And they also shared with us that how the village has no public land. And the only land that exists in the village, which is for common use, is attached to the temple. And this village water tank being one of them. And they explained that how the wastewater from the entire village goes into the village water tank and it needed to be dredged. So we told them, look, we'll get some money for some work, but we will need people to engage with free labor, in the whole act of seva. Now, this is something which our professor, Professor Sabyasachi, who's a sociologist, was very, very mindful, and he told all of us as conservation professionals, they said, look, when we bring a project from outside, we are into the business of paying daily wages. Daily wages is a necessity for day-to-day living, but it should not undermine a tradition of a people which has got to do with seva. So while we can pay people in kind, with certain benefits, we should also put in place certain systems that we do not disempower them by not recognizing voluntary work. So all these youths, these people you see in this photograph, some of them, they worked on daily wages in the temple, but because they saw the value that what was happening in their village, they volunteered their own time and effort for the desilting of the village water tank. We also were mindful that institutional structures are also critical for sustainability. The village people had a trust called the Krishna Temple Trust or Krishna Mandir Trust. And whatever decisions that needed to be taken, we were very mindful that we will not overrule. We will not, even if we have technical answers, all these answers need to be first socialized. And they need to be discussed with the village people that, whatever we decided, whether it was using the old bricks was concerned, using lime mortars was concerned, or doing the village water tank was concerned, it is very important that village people are brought into the conversation so that they know exactly what is happening and they feel party to the decision-making process. At no point should they feel that you may be taking the decision, it's like your parents. If they decide everything for you, even a good decision doesn't seem so good. But when you participate in making of the decision, you kind of take ownership of the decision. And you believe it is right for you because you've also participated you've also thought about it. And same goes in any of these projects related to cultural heritage. And this is something which is more a philosophical question, that whichever the properties associated with the heritage sites needs to be defined as commons for the neighborhood. Because this was a very peculiar condition in Kishangot. Like I said, that because the village belonged to the Thakurs, there were no village commons, village common land. And we realized that there were some assets which were in the name of the temple. And that's what we thought, that these are the assets which need to be treated as much as commons as the temple itself. And we were mindful that all development programs that we bring into the village, conservation is not just when I look back, I look at that today UNESCO, for the first time, culture has been recognized as one of the pillars of sustainable development. And if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 goals. Goal number 11.4 is related to sustainable cities. And, goal number 11 is related to sustainable cities, and 11.4 is related to cultural and natural heritage. And in so many years of work, I've realized that whether it is right to education, right to water, right to equitable development, gender equity, all of this are principles that we need to uphold when we work with cultural heritage. Because the word itself means to conserve our resources. Cultural heritage conservation is about cultural resources. But today, the kind of challenges we have in the world with climate action, with a climate change, with the kind of problems we are facing, even in the case of the pandemic, somewhere human beings need to understand the concept of conservation across all resources in the ecosystem, and culture being one part of it. And culture is a platform that actually, where you can engage with communities and address a wide range of challenges, whether it's related to water or food or gender or poverty, all these issues that you want to you want to address and engage with. Cultural heritage is a very important platform to have this dialogue, because if you're sensitive to a culture of a place, you're able to then have a dialogue with the people of that particular place on all these various very important existential issues that we are facing, which are facing mankind today. So the final slide on this presentation is that what I would like to state is social problems alienates the community from its heritage. Therefore, these need to be dealt with as part of the conservation effort. This would make historic buildings a symbol of civil society. And that is something what you want to achieve. You want people to feel good about their heritage. You want heritage to make a difference to the quality of life of a people. Heritage, the technical matters related to repair of a building, of the wall paintings, all of that is a very basic skill of the conservation professional. But the ecosystem of cultural heritage conservation has to deal with the well-being of the civil society. So thank you very much. And
Thank you, ma'am. It was really an eye-opener for me as well as for all the students who have joined here. Now I would request everyone, if they have any questions, they can drop it in the chat box or unmute themselves.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Prathamesh from IIT BHU. My question is, ma'am, when we talk about the conservation of historical places, like I'm from Maharashtra, and when I talk about conservation of ruins like forts of Shivaji Maharaj, then the rebuilding of that fort, is it a part of conservation, or it's not good for that historical place to rebuild on it?
Prathamesh, that's a very good question. See, what happens is, like in the now Shivaji Maharaj's forts are very unique. I mean, warfare during his time and the kind of places they went and built forts, it always amazes one that how did they even get to those places? Now,
Yes, ma'am.
when we restore a monument, you need to understand the significance of the site, both from its associational value as well as its architectural and technological value as well. Now, in the case of Shivaji's forts, to understand the military engineering is critical. You do not want to restore it in a way that you dumb it down. You know, if you understand, like his forts, if you understand the military engineering aspects of it, and there is evidence enough to rebuild certain areas, like if you were to do, I mean, I'm just imagining that you find half of the fort doesn't exist, but when you do your archaeological investigation, you find the footprint. If you find the footprint, you can build it up to a level that you can see the plan of the building, but you don't build it to a height above that level, because if you're going to start using conjecture, if it's not well documented, we may just undermine the knowledge of that military engineering. So after 50 years, 100 years, somebody goes there and sees a strange looking wall there, they're going to say Shivaji ki time mein aisa building bana tha. Now that is
Yes.
would be using conjecture, and you would be giving false information. So it becomes very, very important that every building is understood for the different layers and different values, and whether you consolidate or reconstruct or structurally repair or interpret, all of that has to be based on very, very sound research
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
and evidence.
Hello, I am Devanshi. Good evening, ma'am. I wanted to ask if there is any documented methodology that you created while conserving this building, because after you leave, there would be people who would like to conserve it for later use. Is there any documented procedure, or the workshops you did with them and when you involve people in, that was it? Because they might need some methodology to how to conserve it for later.
Again, a very good question. See, what happens with cultural heritage, like anywhere, any other aspect of existence, it's like once we restore a building, we've trained some masons, we've trained, they've kind of understood that the use of lime and so on. Unfortunately, what has happened in our traditional construction practices is that when we got colonized the way we did, we have lost a lot of our traditional knowledge. And that exists with, today, if I were to look at our PWD specifications, lime-based materials were there till 2012, and then they were removed from PWD specifications. So today, if somebody wants to repair a building, suppose government comes in and says, okay, we want to repair it, let's look at the item and find the rate, you may not find it then. Similarly, after 50 years, if somebody wants to repair something, and because if something is unprotected, can actually take a very rash decision and replace something with cement plaster or put a RCC slab over the courtyard or whatever. What I'm trying to point at is that when you want to look at a sustainable system of cultural heritage conservation and management, the aspect that I brought out today was what the United Nations is talking about is about inclusive processes. Community should not be undermined in conservation of cultural heritage. Having said that, cultural heritage needs support from policy at the state level, policy at the district level, technological policy as well, which can, once you have a policy, then PWD needs to have those specifications and those materials as part of their vocabulary. Government must have financial allocations to fund villages with their cultural heritage. There should be a list of heritage sites which should be notified that these sites are of significance, but that notification should not alienate the community from their site. It should not become a blue board and a boundary wall and people get completely removed from their heritage. So what I'm saying is that when I started my cultural heritage practice in Punjab, in fact, even today, I would say, we have not developed an ecosystem for sustainable conservation of cultural heritage and sensitive development. So while we were mindful of understanding it and trained them, this is not end-to-end solution. There's much more work that needs to happen at training level, at all the other levels that I have, administrative level, at technological level, at financial level. The state apparatus needs to support it. There should be tax incentives for people who give money for conservation work. This entire ecosystem has not been put in place as yet. So it can only be sustainable if work is done in all those different levels, which is a need of the hour.
Thank you so much, and I feel the same as well. So, I wanted to ask if, you have ever shared the documented building so that they would know in the, because after documentation you know that this was the initial building, how it is right now, the stage is like, but after you said that people might take rash decisions after 50 years, so there must be a public platform to provide the initial documentation, so that people know that this was the initial, and if we were to change, we would change it mindfully.
No, you're right on that. So, see, we restored it one time when I did this project under the Culture of Peace program, but that wasn't enough resources for the restoration of all the wall paintings. Then we got it included in the funding available with from the Asian Development Bank, and so then the temple got, even the wall paintings got restored under an ADB project about, say, 7-8 years ago or 5 years ago. We also got the temple notified as a protected monument by the State Department of Archaeology. The documentation is available with the State Department of Archaeology, but still, it's a very, very weak system right now. I was involved with UNESCO to do a cultural heritage policy for the state. And the recommendation that we gave to the state government is that they need to have district level bodies for heritage. They need to have Patwari level, Tehsildar level involvement to get databases done of historic buildings. Like if I identified, say, about 150 buildings or 200 buildings in Gurdaspur, that's not a comprehensive list. There'll be many more. These need to be notified through a law which is at the district level notification of heritage. There should be a heritage foundation. There should be a funding for conservation of these heritage sites should come through the foundation at that, when you have a district development officer and all that, at that level. Training and capacity building can be something which can be connected to local colleges of architecture. Now, what I'm saying is that in this whole system, a state, a country is a very, very large entity. There is a role for multiple administrative, at the administrative level, there are roles for technical universities, there are roles for professionals. In China, all the consultancies that happen related to cultural heritage is done by universities. Local governments collaborate with universities to do urban renewal work and heritage conservation work. In India, we have not developed that relationship between the district administration, between the urban local bodies and colleges of architecture. Like universities like CEPT has a center. Every department of the university has a center to actually extend themselves into civil society for this work. So what I'm saying is that the institutional structures need to be far more comprehensive. Me giving few plans to the Department of Archaeology or to the Deputy Commissioner or to the Sarpanch is not going to solve the problem.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm Bhavjit Singh, second year student, GNDEC School of Architecture. Ma'am, can you guide me to the audacious approach towards your great saying, think global and act local?
If I can guide you where?
Towards the saying, ma'am, that you mentioned in the webinar about
so
global and act local.
I would, again, lovely. I'm so glad you've asked this question. I would recommend to all of you to read up the work of Sir Patrick Geddes. Now, Sir Patrick Geddes was a town planner. He's known as the father of modern town planning. He was a town planner, a botanist, and a sociologist. And he was from Edinburgh, and he was invited by a lot of Maharajas in the early part of the 20th century to do plans for several of these historic cities, including Patiala, Indore, Lucknow, and many other cities. Now, Sir Patrick Geddes is the one who coined, there's a terminology which is called diagnostic survey. How you do, what we try to do in Kishankote is almost like a diagnostic survey. Then he talks about conservative surgery. Then he talks about act local, and to basically your knowledge to be global, but you act local. All of these very, very foundational concepts which are relevant today, and which even resonate with the Sustainable Development Goals, is something which Sir Patrick Geddes introduced in the early part of the 20th century. And there's some wonderful, inspiring reading material available on Sir Patrick Geddes. So I would recommend all of you to, this think global and act local is something you will find in his teachings as well. He has this wonderful valley section which talks about the relationship of the region with the city, that the resources in the hinterland actually lead to production of wealth in the urban areas, and that valley section being a very important part to recognize people, place, and work. This amazing conceptual level work that was done by him. And you must be mindful, we're talking about a town planner who was a sociologist and who was a botanist as well. So he understood people and nature very, very closely to be able to do justice to habitats.
Thanks for guiding, ma'am.
Welcome.
Ma'am, we have some questions in the chat box. I'll just read them out.
I'm very impressed by the audience here, for the young audience here, because normally, these webinars, one lands up with 3-4 questions, but I must say very, very deep questions. And I can understand how genuine they are in terms of people wanting to, young minds wanting to know more. So I'm very, very impressed.
Hey, ma'am, this is Baldev Singh. I'm planner first year. Ma'am, do you research in Sikh architecture or Sikh heritage? Actually, in local level, I see a lot of gurdwaras and old gurdwaras, and the heritage local committee destroying them. And do you have any policy or research in the gurdwara architecture, or to preserve gurdwara old buildings?
The gurdwaras is a very, very interesting, the transformations in gurdwaras is a very interesting phenomenon. And on one hand, as an architect, I would have said that, would have been nice to have the older buildings in place and not removed to make these larger structures. On the other hand, I also understand where that is coming from. See, the thing is that when I look at the elements that make a Gurdwara, it starts with what Guru Nanak Dev Ji introduced is the idea of the Dharamsal. And the elements of the Gurdwara is, of course, the Guru Granth Sahib right in the center, the Bani being central, and material culture is something which is secondary. So it's the Bani and the Sangat. And then you have your Langar, your Seva, your Sarovar, and then all of them have very, very important meanings, because when you understand what each of the gurus were contributing in institution making of the Sikh faith, it has nothing to do with the building. So while I appreciate that as well, on the other hand, when I look at a historic building built either during the Guru period, like for instance, we restored the Guru Ki Masjid built by Guru Ar.Gurmeet S.Rai in Gurdaspur, which is a mosque built by the 6th Sikh Guru. There for me, it is very relevant to see the building itself. You understand the architecture of the period, authenticity, it's no more folklore. The fact that Sikh faith is a historical faith, so you have events and buildings of a particular period which represent a particular knowledge and information. So on that level, I feel it's important to retain the building. But when I think of what is a Gurdwara, then I can also see where a bigger building to house more people, all of that becomes a need of the hour. So I would recommend, actually, much has been lost, the coexistence of both. that we do not have to build a building right where the older building is. If we were to retain the old building, restore it, and come to a particular a protocol of maintaining it and its significance, why we are looking after it. Whereas the Gurdwara with the Guru Granth Sahib and the practices of the community to be kept separate at the same site, ideally the coexistence would be, to my mind, would be most desirable. But it's not one or the other. You know.
Thank you.
We have a question, ma'am, in the chat box from Vinay Kumar. That is there any intense need of studying ASI codes to develop technological solution for repairing heritage buildings?
I don't know whether there exists anything called technical codes by ASI. There is a book called the Conservation Manual, prepared by Sir John Marshall in the first part of the 20th century. He was the first, if I remember correctly, he was the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. I could be wrong there, but anyway. Sir John Marshall authored this book called the Conservation Manual, where he talks about certain very do's and don'ts, But, conservation has, technology has developed so much in the 20th century and now in the 21st century that you cannot have a toolbox of technologies. For instance, if you want to do geotechnical strengthening of a monument, a Qutub Minar would need a very different intervention as compared to a Taj Mahal which sits on the banks of the river. Similarly, materiality. A stone building has a different challenges. A brick building has different issues. So you can put together, the methodology is what you need to know. Documenting, monitoring. The toolbox needs to be our entire, the different techniques for mapping, monitoring, strengthening, and so on. But it cannot be that, look, if you have this crack this wide, go fix it like this. It can't be like that. But you can have a methodology-based toolbox, but not a solution-based toolbox.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
We have
Vivek, ma'am.
Vivek.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I also have a question for you, ma'am. Recently, I am teaching my students this architectural design subject, which is about village study. So we went to this village named Kila Raipur in Ludhiana district only, nearly 30 kilometers or rather 20 kilometers from our college. And our objective was to study the culture of the village, the built heritage, and the intangible aspects of the village. And then students were supposed to design a community center in the village. So to my surprise, when we visited the village for one full week and we interacted with the people, what we noticed is like nearly half of the houses, they were either logged or they were inhabited by the migrant laborers who were working for the farmers. And the whole sole objective for which we took that study, to study the culture, that culture was missing. Not the intangible one we could find, and neither the tangible one, because many of the buildings which were very old, that seemed to be very old, they were kind of either dilapidated, and there were few buildings which were recently demolished by the migrants, and they built their own structures over there. So now I fear from 4 to 5 years from now, this universities have to scrap this subject of village study, because the objective we would not be able to fulfill. So what is your take on it, ma'am?
What is the objective, Vivek, in the first place?
The
Of
objective was the our objective was to study the character of the village.
So now the
But
point is, are we saying villages are not relevant anymore?
by visiting this particular village, Killa Raipur, and especially which is very very popular because of the rural Olympics that happens every year for the past so many years. The people have lost this sense of ownership, the sense of belongingness. And the Sarpanch told that all the youth, they are more inclined towards moving out of the country, and the built heritage also is not very
You
much
know, the
there.
thing is, so Vivek, where I would come, like for instance, I come from a village and I go to my village very often. And I've done restoration work in lots of villages, Kishankot being one of them. Then there's Ratar Chatar on the border, there's another one. My village is in Gurdaspur district as well. Now, the point is, if I think of a village, what does a village mean to me? What does a village mean? Now, is it the number of people who live there? Is it because a certain kind of works they do? Is there a certain knowledge that they have? For instance, in my own village, or in across Punjab, I would say, one is construction techniques. What is a sustainable way of building? They may have transformed. When I've gone and built my own house in my village with brick and lime mortar. There are some people who've been asking me that they also want to build with either earth or with brick, with lime. Now, the point is that there was, as far as habitat is concerned, there was a certain way of building. And I'm not going to give you solutions. I'm going to just leave some questions. The building vocabulary of Punjab has been from the earth. The simplest way of building was building with mud, adobe bricks. If you had a little bit more money, you did burnt bricks with mud mortar. If you had a little bit more money, you used burnt brick with lime mortar. If you had a little bit more money, you did lime plaster. And so as your resources improved, you see from absolute adobe architecture going all the way to building with RCC now. Now, what does it do? What is the comfort level? You know, in Germany and Switzerland and all, people are doing adobe architecture. People are building with mud because they've developed technologies to build with mud in such a way. I mean, I went for training in earthen architecture organized by Getty 2 years ago to UAE. And it's a phenomenal material. Now, the point is, when you're teaching about vernacular architecture, you may not be able to see it there right now. But to understand, maybe choose another village, even if there's a certain remnants of working with earth. See, we need to understand why people are not building with lime or, all are, whether we do a single-storied building or a six-storied building, we are using the same vocabulary of materials as compared to any other part of the world where they have understood that if you're doing a domestic architecture, you build with certain material. If you're doing institutional buildings, you build with a certain material. If you're doing industrial buildings, you build with a certain material. But in India, we use the same RCC, the same steel, the same cement, irrespective of whether we are doing a small building or a very large building. So somewhere the understanding of the vernacular building has disappeared. So we need to understand the problem differently now. Similarly, when it comes to water management, every village used to have a village water tank, and that's how the drainage used to happen. The kind of ecological practices that people are aware of today, like NEERI and other institutions, there are ecological ways of managing village wastewater. Today, the villages are using soak pits. Their drinking water pumps, hand pumps, and soak pits are very close to each other, that their drinking water is getting contaminated. Now, when you are doing village studies, we should actually ask questions that what are we missing and what do we need to introduce to make village life, to introduce quality of life in our villages, because villages are not irrelevant. Whether it is the labor, they are still human beings. We are still a farming community, and the farming community needs to live in a village. Now, what is today, architects and planners can think about that, what is the kind of habitat that our villages should have? What from the past, what from the present, and what in terms of innovation into the future? And you are sitting in the Guru Nanak Engineering College. So to bring engineering knowledge, not the conventional engineering knowledge, but the more innovative engineering knowledge to make life in a village a better quality life. You know, what kind of habitat and planning do we need to do is where we need to go. So we need to document the past, we need to understand, but you know, heritage is not about something quaint and ethnic of some sort. You know, we are not trying to, in fact, I feel very, very terrible when I see some sort of, you know, imitations being done and passed off as traditional Punjabi living. That's not the way we should be doing things. You know. We need to look at these things very, very differently.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have another question in the chat box. That can we construct multi-story with vernacular materials like mud, bamboo? If yes, what we can do to ensure its strength?
This is now cannot be answered in one, you know, in just a single answer. Yes, you can do. When you say multi-story, see, the point is that I was talking about mud construction even earlier. There are different ways of building mud with mud. You know, in fact, oh, how do I give you this? You can make a pit in your backyard, and irrespective of what kind of material you get, you can actually build with it. Now, this is something which I learned when I went for training in building with mud to UAE in 2019, was it? Was 18? I forget. That's what I had gone to train in earthen architecture. Now, I would ask you to do some research with, look at Getty Institute. They undertook this program, and there are a few people who are already doing some work in this direction. There is work happening in Dharamsala. I'm sure you're familiar with that. There's an architect called Sabneet. She's got a practice called Imrat. Then there is another architect, Sangeeta Baez, in Delhi. She's also working with mud, but not so much as Sabneet is doing. But there is this place in Kangra. If you write to me, I will link you with those people who actually train you in the use of earth as a building material. Now, what happens is, depending on the kind of earth that comes out of a pit in your backyard, you need to see a rock is the biggest particle and silt is the smallest. From the silt to the clay to the sand to as it goes bigger and bigger, you need to mix these in a certain composition with a certain amount of water, which defines the kind of technology you use to build with earth. So whether you do rammed earth, which is, you know, you put scaffolding and you ram earth, or whether you do adobe, which is mud blocks, or whether you use cob, which is using straw in earth and so on, depending on the nature of earth you get, you do your mixes with the right amount of water and compression and so on, you can actually build with earth and you can build very tall buildings. Yeah, that's how Yemen, if you look at architecture in UAE or in Oman, you'll see the most fabulous buildings they build with earth. Of course, you need to protect your earthen architecture from rain and so on. So a combination of sun-dried bricks with some burnt bricks, with some lime, with timber, with straw, with all of that. There's a lot of potential to be experimental in architecture. And it's quite a phenomenal thing. If I had got introduced to urban architecture, say about 15 years earlier, I would have done some building with earth as well. But I kind of got introduced to it a bit later because I'm now looking at ecological practices of nature and culture, coexistence of nature and culture, and that's how I'm looking at urban architecture as well. You can learn in use of this. There are centers in Kutch. There is Sandeep Pirmani who's teaching there. There's Auroville. Then there is Dharamshala. There are lots of these places where you can actually go and get your initial exposure in building with earth. And then there are international organizations like Krater and many, many more, which you can develop, where you can develop your knowledge and your skills in this direction. But it is very much possible, and it is something which needs to be explored. And I urge all you young people to kind of, work with this, with new materials, with more sustainable practices.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question here that how is...
We close at 6:30, Ishika?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can this be the last question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
This question is, how is conservation different from restoration?
Okay, this is the simplest of it all. And see, what happens is that there are multiple words that are used in conservation. It can be from restoration, preservation, conservation, and people define them a little differently. In the US, they call it historic preservation. In Italy, they call it more conservation. UK also uses the word conservation. Now, if you were to look at the Venice Charter, just type in Venice Charter of ICOMOS. In fact, there are several charters. Go onto the site of ICOMOS, ICOMOS, International Council on Monuments and Sites. And it's an international body with individuals who are members, and there are about 25 odd scientific committees, and they all work in different areas. Now, when you look at and each of these scientific committees come out with these recommendations and charters. One of the earlier ones is the Venice Charter, which gives you the definition of these words. Restoration is more or less understood as where you recreate features which are missing. You're restoring something which is, which disappeared or was lost as part of a building, and you're recreating that. That's restoration. Preservation is more or less used in situations where whatever you find in whichever form, you just consolidate and preserve it. You don't build on it. So if you have a broken arch, if it's just half of it is standing, if you just retain that, it's preservation. If you make the second part and recreate the whole thing, then that's called restoration. Conservation means a whole complex tools. You can restore part of the building, you can preserve part of the building, you can reuse part of the building. A whole lot of approaches to different aspects can be put in place, and that entire process is called conservation. And so vocabulary has been developing over time as new questions are asked and new solutions are found. But this is something you could research. There's a lot of material available, and ICOMOS provides a very good platform and the various scientific committees provide a very useful platform for a lot of work that has happened in this sector in the last several years. And we can close.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your time. I must admit that I have met many celebrity architects, but I haven't seen anybody like you, the most humble celebrity architect. Now today I have, I have interacted with. I must admit this, and I just loved the enthusiasm with which you have interacted with the students. You have answered their queries. It is really a very humble experience for me, ma'am. And I'm very much grateful on behalf of my college that you have spared your precious time and you have enlightened the students and even the faculty with your words of wisdom, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, ma'am.
much, Vivek, for reaching out. All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
All right.